So time for another fascinating discussion. So let's bring on our first panel of speakers. We have for you the director at Bresmar United, Brenda Kunda, the CEO at Pro Sport International, Michael Makaab, managing director at Sisu Sports Management, Lindi Ngwenya, and the instructor at CAF and COSAFA, Fran Hilton-Smith, and your moderator for today's first session, author at Dual Dream, Dave Waters. Please welcome them to the stage. Now, this is a key topic. It's the perfect one to start off on day two. David, very much looking forward to this. Over to you for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to have been meeting and connecting with many of you over these last 2 days. It's been so inspiring to see the passion, dedication, and enthusiasm towards football, people traveling from all over the world. But I want to start asking a difficult and uncomfortable question to each one of you. Who here is really dedicated enough to football to sit through 4 matches in every group stage of the World Cup? Is there anyone here who is going to have that dedication? Who here has got that dedication? Is there anyone here? Who's got that? We've got 1. We've got 2, 3. Can we give those 5 people a round of applause? Because I'm impressed. I'm impressed if we can get those 5 people. For me, I'm looking at maybe if I can do 2 or 3 games. So as we look towards the World Cup, we've got 130 players from Africa, from Senegal, we've got from Morocco, Cameroon, Tunisia, Ghana, 130 African players. 103 of those players are based in Europe. We've got 10 of those players are based in Asia. We've got 13 of those players who are based in North Africa. And we've got 4 of those players are based in sub-Saharan Africa. So just 2% of the World Cup representatives who will be in those squads come from sub-Saharan Africa, or from Africa. What does this mean? Does this highlight that the chasm is growing between Europe and Africa? Or does it highlight that African players are now able to tap into something that is the professionalism, the intensity, the quality that was highlighted by Maritzburg yesterday? In the women's game, we've got, within the women's game, we've got the 23 World Cup qualifiers of Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, and Zambia. Many of these players are based in Europe. Many have gone on scholarships. And as Lydia highlighted, the CEO of SAFA, is this a positive thing? So these are many of the issues that we're going to look to unpack today. My name's Dave Waters. I'm the author of the book Dual Dream and technical director of the junior phase at Ubuntu Football Academy, an academy that is birthed out of 12 years of a desire to invest in young men who will take responsibility in their communities. We have 22 boys who've gone on to scholarships in America. 18 have made the step into professional football. We have teachers, policemen, entrepreneurs, and an investment banker. Part of our program there is Dual Dream, which was the book I authored last year, really to address 2 maths problems we have in the football game, in the academies specifically. One is less than 1% of academy footballers, whether globally or within Africa, will make that step into a sustained career. And the second maths problem is football careers are short, and at best, 1/3 of your working life can be as a professional footballer. The solution? Start getting into the wiring the brains of 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds early with this idea that they need 2 dreams in life. And then academies start preparing them every day, every week for that transition when they stop pursuing or playing professional football. Okay, I'm going to introduce the panel. We've got Fran Hilton-Smith, who many of you would have seen yesterday. Fran has a footballing background, a pedigree that had Kaiser Mutuang said to her, if you were a boy, I would sign you for Chiefs. Fran had an instrumental role during apartheid. for bringing multiracial football within the women's game, helped set up many coaching structures, the Tux High Performance Center for the women's national program, and has been instrumental in seeing Banyana reach the 2012 and 2016 Olympics, as well as the 2019 and 2023 World Cups. Fran has served for 11 years on CAF as the only woman technical director within that role. We've got Lindi. Lindi comes from London. She's part of Sisu Sports Management, representing players from Africa and within the women's game. They have offices in Nigeria and London. And this week, there's an app you must check out. Uburu, is that correct? Uburu app, which is connecting potential players for scholarships into America, creating that avenue and that platform for players to make it through. Well done. We've got Mike Makaab. Mike, 94, was head coach of Orlando Pirates and went through to see them become national champions, then had intercontinental success in 95, and then was a technical advisor as the 96 successful AFCON South African team. Mike has a passion for business and football and brought those two things together with pro sport. And he is representing players from around the globe, but specifically within Africa. Brenda Kunda is from Zambia. Brenda started her journey into football in 2004. She had a passion to bring her company into a local club, and since that time has invested heavily into this club in northeastern Zambia and has seen the fruit of this. Many young men coming through successful in life on and off the field. Brenda is in 2016 joined the Zambian FA with a mandate to take women's football to the next level, a 10-year mandate, but she did it in 5. She's seen the women's national team go on to reach the Olympics and also now qualification for the World Cup. Brenda is also part of the CASAFA region and chairperson for this region. So I'm going to start off by going straight to Fran, and we're going to look at what is the state of the game at the moment. Can you just highlight, Fran, from the individual players that you've worked with? How are they doing?
Well, I think as our topic, nature and nurture, I think from when I got into FIFA 2001, went to all the World Cups, we have naturally very talented players. And I think over the years, with them attending World Cups, Olympics, they've been snapped up overseas as to play professional football, where they get nurtured now, playing high competition. And when those players come back to their countries, like now for the African Women Championships we had in Morocco, they bring back all that they've learned and enables the national teams to do better. And I think that's what we've seen over the years, is the players are improving. We finally have many professional women players. There's over 108 playing in the world at the moment. Many of them at top clubs, Barcelona, AC Milan. We never dreamt that we would see our women earning good money, playing football. So women's football's on the rise, attracting huge spectators. In Europe, 90,000. Even last week in Morocco, we had 50,000 there for the African Women Champions League. So women's football's on the rise and becoming very popular, and I think we have to continue on that path.
Sure. Brenda, if I can just ask you, you're involved with overseeing the CASAFA region of the women's football. How do you see the health of the game? What are the attitudes to women's football from your perspective?
It's difficult, and Difficult question because it goes across the board. It's also about what are the football federations around the continent looking at in terms of women football, and are we having support, good support from the federation in order to have look at how healthy and how good women football is doing in Africa. But when we come to the southern side of Africa, I think women football has really done very well. Because I remember when we started most of the tournaments, I think we had tournaments that were going on, but one of the biggest comeback that we had was in 2017 as COSAFA. We had tournaments in Zimbabwe, and it was a full house. I think almost every country around was able to bring a team. And so over the years, we've seen that we've had a number of other tournaments that have come up, because at that time it was mostly concentrated with the senior team. Then we looked at the under 17, then we went down to also to the under 20, and now we have the schooling as well, which is the under 15. We just came back from Malawi, where we did the schools championship. So you can see the growth of women football, definitely. And I think when you look at what Sue yesterday alluded to, it then comes now back to what is the motivation, because over the years, in as much as we've had all these teams and all these countries sending teams to come and play football, but on some points we've seen a reduction of teams that have come and participated. And the ones that have constantly participated, you can see the results. One of them is Zambia, the other one is South Africa. Yeah. I think the consistency in them always being at those tournaments and developmental tournaments, you can see the growth. And you can see how well they're doing, and then you can also see how they're also investing in the lower. So they're not just looking at the senior side of it, but they're also looking at grassroots. Where are we coming from? So that there's that continuity, and there's also that succession plan. Sure. So when you talk about women football in that area, I think we're doing well. The encouragement to the other FAs that don't seem to want to participate in these programs, I mean, success comes with what you put in. If you don't put in any effort, you won't see that success. So you need to actually sacrifice and ensure that you do the best for the women, and you do deliberate policies for the women as well. And you see those countries that have done that and supported the women, they're doing very well.
Great. And Lindi, you travel a lot between Africa and Europe. How do you see the women's game? Is the chasm, of the last 10 years, is it growing? Is it getting bigger? Or is it narrowing? How do you analyze that situation?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you've kind of used 10 years as a time frame, because I actually think that really in the last 10 years, if you use, for instance, England, where I'm from as an example, that's where you started to see the sort of big, and to use Brenda's word, consistent investment into women's football. And you've seen the benefits of that for the whole England women's setup, from club all the way down to grassroots. So that sort of spurt, so to speak, in women's football development has only really been quite recent, even across Europe. Consequently, I feel like the gap between Africa and Europe from the women's game it's certainly a gap, and it has, I would say, grown for many of the reasons that Brenda and Fran would obviously kind of attest to, that there's inconsistency of investment, there's not really coherent strategy across maybe all of the member associations in CAF. However, I feel that gap is one that is still bridgeable, and you can see that because a lot of the African female players who go over to Europe and settle in and bed in Europe, come back to their national teams, you can see the uplift in terms of the level that they can bring to their national team, as well as obviously to themselves as players. There is a difference, obviously I'm sure Mike will kind of elaborate, but I feel if you look at the men's game, that's where the gap is bigger, and possibly the chasm is wider. The men's game clearly is well established. I mean, we're talking about decades, hundreds of years now, well, 100 years of investment effectively in Europe, all those systems in place, the increased investment that's come in with the professionalisation of the men's game in the last 30 years. And where 20 years ago you had South African male players competing in top Premier League teams, you know, you think like Stephen Pienaar's of the world, Lucas Radebe, etc. Now I don't really see that happening unless you can either bridge that gap by getting the players relatively young into the European system, or you have almost a step change where you think, okay, let's have a 5-10 year plan where we have a plan where we're going to try to uplift the overall level of technical development and consequently player development. So I feel like the gap in the men's game is huge and quite difficult to bridge. I feel like the women's game, there's definitely opportunities to bridge.
Well, I'd like to ask Mike on looking at the last 10, 15 years. Specifically, if we look at in 2009, FIFA introduced Article 19, a law that came in to stop the movement of minors, so under 18 players with 3 exceptions, from moving between borders, really with the protection against sham agents and child trafficking. Since that rule has come in 2009, how would you analyse its success, firstly, and then secondly, how would you say it's impacted within the development opportunities?
Thanks very much, Dave, and good morning to everyone. I think the stats that you gave us on local-based sub-Saharan African players in the 5 African teams that are at the Qatar World Cup speaks volumes for the fact that the chasm is growing each and every single year between the development of, let's focus on Europe, European footballers and African footballers. There is little doubt in my mind that FIFA had to do something to stop the human trafficking aspect of taking young players into a foreign environment, and they did that successfully by restricting that age to the age of what we term as majority, that's 18. And that's been successful, and I think we all agree that there's zero tolerance when it comes to something like human trafficking and taking advantage of minors. However, from a footballing point of view, I believe it's had an incredibly detrimental impact on the development of African players. You only have to go back to 2009, and I haven't done the stats in depth, but there has been probably a 30% reduction in the number of African players playing in the top 5 leagues in Europe. And we all know that from a South African viewpoint, very few players are playing in the top 5 leagues in the world, if any. So while I believe protection of minors is of paramount importance, I also believe that FIFA have to relook at this age restriction. They have to reduce it to at least parity with the European Union or EEA, where a player of 16.
But do you realistically think it will happen? Because I know in 2016 there was another European courts. It was tested there and it was rejected. Do you realistically think that it can change?
Yes, I think it will change, and I think it will change from enormous pressure from the right quarters of football.
But how can it change while still protecting against these rogue agents, still preventing a market of whether it be tours or whether it be people making money for very wrong reasons, which could lead to human trafficking? How can those things happen together?
I'm actually pleased you brought that up, because when I complained about the fact that FIFA deregulated the agency business way back in 2014, and then they placed the onus on the individual football associations to come up with their criteria in terms of governance of the agency business, obviously within the parameters that FIFA had set. I said that I thought it was to the detriment of football, and everybody said, well, you're protecting your industry because the barrier of entry into your industry is tough. And the more people that are allowed to enter freely, the more difficult it will be for you as an agent to keep the market share that you have. Of course that's true, but it's not true to the point where it's affecting the industry, and I'm glad to see that FIFA are looking at reintroducing regulations. What that will be, we're not too sure of, and we actually spoke about it off air, as long as the reintroduction is accompanied by proper governance, implementation, and sanctioning. Let me go back to what I believe can be done to reduce the age without the fear of the imbalance in the protection of minors being affected. Should be a weighty, heavy onus upon football clubs who bring in minors to have proper systems in place. Not only systems of football development, systems of education, systems of retention of the family unit, however that may be, systems of the introduction of these foreign players into an alien environment where the language is different, the culture is different, the food is different. All of those things have to weigh heavily on the clubs that are bringing these young players in. And I think if they get that right, we will see a system that works, and we will see an upsurge in the number of African players in the next decade that can ply their trade in the top 5 leagues in the world to the advantage of those leagues.
Sure. Okay, I'd like to take the discussion into now an area of investment into the game. Let's start with Brenda. Where does the money need to be invested in women's football?
Oh, if you ask me, it's a lot of areas. It's definitely a lot of areas that investment is needed. But I think to bring it down to reality, it would be a lot of capacity building in terms of administrators. I think for women football, when you look at most of the teams that are run by, are being managed by men, and we're not saying the men can't help in managing women's football, pardon me, Mike. But what we're saying is it's women's football, and we would like as many administrators that are running women football to be women. Because of for obvious reasons, there's a lot that happens to women, and some of the things that men will not understand, but a woman will. So certain positions should actually be deliberate and be given to the women to run the women football. In COSAFA, we have done that. We've put a deliberate policy to say teams that are coming for the tournaments should actually have head coaches that are women, the doctors should be women, and all that. So we're talking about capacity building. So how do we then have the coaches? Can we then introduce all the courses that are relevant to someone to be able to coach a team? And then also, again, when we talk about the physios, again, it's the same thing. So it's all about capacity building and the education behind. And then mostly, then again, it's also the playing fields. The playing fields. What kind of fields are the women playing in? Most of the time, you have to negotiate. As women, you always have to negotiate. Oh no, you have to wait for Bafana to finish, or you have to wait for, if I take it back home, you're saying, okay, we have to wait for Zanako to train. And then sometimes we don't have...
so the prioritization,
yes, the prioritization of women,
often to have the first...
Exactly. The men always often to have the advantage over the women. So if that is the case, then what, as FAs, as MAs, as the investment now should be, can we increase the number of playing fields in a country, in an area, so that then there's that the sharing can then be more equalized and more balanced?
And Fran, can I ask you, on your last 30, 40 years, when you look back, if you could name one thing that, if you were to be advising, let's say, another national FA where the women's program is struggling and it's barely taken off, what would be the one area, when you reflect on Banyana's success over these years, that you would say invest in this thing?
Well, I think over the years, what I realized was really vital was to have an academy of some sort. So you can have development where naturally talented players can come in and be nurtured. And we were very fortunate that 19 years ago we started a high performance center, and players have come through that, gone on to study at university in America, study here, play university football, because education is a big priority. And it's really paid off. They were nurtured, and in the Banyana team that won the recent African Women Championships in Morocco, 14 of the players that were in that team came from the High Performance Center. So it shows that that is something that needs to be established, even at a small level. We even have a country like Namibia, I've been involved there, Botswana, where they use their like house, football house, to make a small academy where players can come in and be given more scientific support, working on their nutrition, etc., and having more competition, because that's why I think Africa doesn't compete on an even footing with the European teams, is we don't compete enough. There's not enough competition in Africa. There's only the Women's Championships every 2 years, and now, of course, club champs. But those are areas I think that we need to really look at and develop.
Mike, you're a businessman, you're involved in football. What needs to be invested into Africa and the structures? Where does the money need to go?
Have you got a week to discuss the topic?
We've got 14 minutes and 26 seconds.
There are a number of different areas that I believe investment has to be placed into. But I might surprise you by saying this, that unless, and I'm talking across the country and across the continent, unless we improve the quality of the football pitches our youngsters both train on and play on, we are forever going to be developing footballers who are highly skillful but don't have the basic techniques that the European counterparts have. And, you know, we often confuse skill with technique. Africans are blessed with a number of qualities, two of which I think are unique: athleticism and skill. Technique is the basic of football. You should not have to teach an 18-year-old, 17-year-old, a 16-year-old the basics of receiving a ball, letting the ball flow through your body and passing the ball, what pace you pass the ball at. That should be absolute second nature to them. It should be inbred, part of the default system. The point is that when you're playing football on hard, uneven, inconsistent surfaces, you're having to use a completely different skill set to bring the ball under control, to pass the ball, to cross the ball, as a goalkeeper, to save the ball. So all of these basic techniques lack in African footballers, unless you have a specific program on beautifully manicured surfaces that is taking place on a consistent basis.
Oh.
And therefore, I think we need a massive investment to improve the quality of the surfaces upon which our players play. That's the one thing. The second thing is, and I'm going to probably put a number of noses out of joint here, I have yet to see a program where a European-based football club comes into Africa and sets up an academy that has resulted in the sort of success that you would anticipate.
Why would you say that?
Purely because, well, I'm going to use an example. I won't use the name of the academy, but there's an academy in our province that is head and shoulders above any other academy in this province. And they go out and win games 10-0 and 7-0, and that sort of competition is not developing the kids. You have to step out of your comfort zone as a young player. You have to be subjected to competitive matches that are going to extract the best out of you. So you have a top academy, for example, in Ghana, and they do everything in the right way. They play in a league where they totally dominate. What are you really doing with these youngsters? These youngsters have to get into Europe at the earliest possible age. So surface is important so that the players at a young age can develop the right basic techniques, but then for increased development, they have to move into Europe at a younger age.
If I understand, Right to Dream use quite a clever model around this in terms of placements. So boys go for placements for a period of time where they take their books with them and they just get to experience. Do you think that those sort of opportunities could be a bit of a bridge?
Absolutely. So what we do as a company, and I'm not here to sell my company because a number of companies do this, but what we do as a company, we'll find a talented 16-year-old and we will take that 16, without affecting his education, because we're very strong on that, we'll take that 16-year-old to a football club in Europe for the next 2 years of his life, probably twice to 3 times a year, just to get a taste and a feeling of the European culture and environment.
And has that been beneficial?
Hugely beneficial. We find that those players sign their first professional contract with the senior team when they turn 18.
Sure. Lindi, I want to come across to you and specifically around this app that you've launched, and I just want to hear a bit more of your heart around providing opportunities for around scholarships. Where did this come from?
Yeah, so the app I've launched is called aburuafrica.com. It kind of feeds into lots of things that have been mentioned over the last day or so. The importance of education, the fact that, even if you've got the best academy system, the amount of players that are actually going to end up playing professionally at high water mark is probably about 25% for your academy system. At the sort of low water mark, you're probably talking about, fractions of 1%. So we've got to think as well about the people who go through that process and, how we can utilize, obviously, the development they've had and continue to kind of develop them personally as well as on the football side. So I've been a great believer across the continent of Africa that education has got to be embedded in the sort of football development pathway that we provide. And for those players who, for instance, are not maybe at the age of 18, going to make the professional game at that stage, there are other avenues. And, the US college system is, a fantastic medium where players can get continued professional football development, plus they get the education. And if they come out of those programs, some of those players can actually go into the professional game, or alternatively, they still have a fantastic, personal development vehicle with regards to a college degree. So that's really what we're trying to do. Is the way I've described it is open the opportunity envelope for players.
Do you think that whether in the male or female game, players in Africa are aware of these opportunities, firstly, and secondly, are they aware? Do they have access to the information? And I guess your app is part of the solution, but do they know how to go about getting these scholarships? Because some of them are R1 million a year, incredible opportunities. What's your views?
Look, I think that, as you've just touched upon, we want to make as many people, players, clubs, academies, aware of the opportunities that are out there, either directly with football or through football, whether it be scouts, coaches, other roles you can do in the game. And I'm a strong believer in that. I think going back to some of the points I've made about how we're going to kind of uplift the game across the continent of Africa, I feel the capacity building element is huge. And what that means is around the education and making people realize that, it's not necessarily about the dream of the 1% or whatever who become professional. There are so many routes that you can take into the game. And so long as you embed education in that, so we have competent people in those roles, then that is what will raise the level of the game here. Mike, obviously, and Brenda obviously touched on the issue of pitches and, the surface. That is a huge issue, and, I would not contend that. I think it's a massive issue. However, at the end of the day, I still think that a fundamental core issue we have across the continent is the coach development aspect of things. So good coaches make good players, and we have good coaches across the continent. We don't have enough of them. Yeah. Now, there's various reasons for that. Maybe there's accessibility to licensing courses, etc. But there's also a bit of a mindset, I feel, of knowledge transfer, where actually what you need to do now is really focus on knowledge sharing. I feel like that information and that sort of high-level kind of coaching knowledge needs to be shared. We need to really kind of involve grassroots all the way up to top-level coaches to share the information, to interact with each other, and to grow our own innovation as African coaches, rather than always sort of looking to Europe for kind of knowledge transfer, because it just goes in and it doesn't dissipate into the system and consequently uplift the level of the player development.
So looking at universities and further academics, Fran, what do you see the role within South Africa and Africa of universities, specifically within the women's game? Do you see they have a critical role moving ahead into the future?
Absolutely. I think university football is the way to go. And as Lindi said, specifically in women's football, not everyone's going to be a professional player. So we put a lot of emphasis on education as well. And in fact, in South Africa, for instance, all the universities play football, and they're right up there at the top. And most of our coaches now of the national teams are women, and they have university degrees in sports science. So this is something that we're really promoting in Africa, is to have women coaches and to have people with university degrees in the relevant subjects that enable them to develop better players, because we want to ensure that we have the highest level of coaching in the women's football to enable us to get players going more to play in Europe, developing players like Assisata Shwala, who's one of the best players playing in Europe, Barcelona. And we need to get our players at these high levels so that we can further develop our national teams. So one day at the World Cup, we can come home with that trophy.
Okay, we're coming into land now, so I'm going to ask some quick fire questions. Brenda, with added investment in the women's game, can you paint a picture of what the future could look like? With added financial business investment.
Added financial investment in women's football, I think it's going to turn around. It's something that everybody's going to talk about. Women is on the rise. Women is a sleeping giant. And given the equal opportunity that men are being given, women will do wonders. Okay. I mean, when in your introduction you talked about how it took us five years to get the women to the World Cup. If we are given that opportunity, we'll shine.
So your observation from Zambia is that things can happen quickly in women's football?
Things can happen quickly with the investment and with the right investment, yes.
Lindi, I know your daughter got into football at age 5 in London. From an African perspective, to have a formal girls program at that age, that's young. How would you, just a quick summary of how would you analyse that and the impact on the women's game and things that maybe Africa could learn from that?
Yeah, so I think what that really attests to with regards to my daughter sort of starting football, and like I say, it's not structured football, it's fun at that age. I'm not trying to turn her into like a mini Assisata Shwala at 5.
But there's an invitation for girls to come to a programme.
It's all about access. That's the word. And I feel that we've actually not really touched upon it in the short time we've had, but certainly on the women's side of the game, I feel like access is key. We need to make the game accessible to girls, and it's still not accessible to girls in a lot of places across England. And certainly when I look across the African continent, it's different pictures for different countries, but I think a theme is that the accessibility of football for girls needs to improve so that a girl who can get into the game at a relatively young age rather than the sort of age 10, 11, 12 that I still see in a lot of countries. And one minor point I'll add to that is I think a good way to get that accessibility is to really look at schools. And if you're talking about investment, is investing in school programs, because that's where you're going to have the captive audience with the girls.
Brilliant. Mike, you see the time on the clock there. What fills you with optimism? What gives you hope for the future within African football?
The success of footballers like Sadio Mane, Mo Salah, who have been nominated for Ballon d'Or, the incredible impact that African footballers at the highest level have had on the teams that they play for. But I have to end that this optimism will only be realized and fueled by proper investment in Africa, with proper governance of that investment, and secondly, access for the players, both male and female, to move into the European environment at a much younger age than 18.
Panel, I want to thank you all for contributing, and thank you for your investment into the game in this beautiful continent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, appreciate the conversation, Dave. Off you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. Well, we danced around a bit in that conversation. We covered a lot of ground. Thank you to Dave for guiding us through there. And we're starting off with just simply that standpoint of how South African players are playing, representing, competing in Europe. Yes, there has obviously been a little bit of a reduction over time since the heyday of the 1990s, that 96 Africa Cup of Nations win, and obviously competing at World Cups, etc., etc. And interestingly, there was that element of that balance of, right, how do we counteract human trafficking element, whereas we also need to provide the pathway for South African players to develop and test themselves against the very best in the world, certainly at their age level. Focus, as absolutely there should be, on women's football. Where should the money be spent? Brenda talks about capacity building, administrators. We're not saying that men can't help, but it is women's football. We should love as many people running the game be women as opposed to men. And just try, again, we talked about this yesterday. Men don't have to be enemies, they can be allies. They can really help elevate women's football. We have to give them the ability to lead and show us what we can do to support them. Lindi was talking about education being embedded to the pathway. Good coaches make good players, but we don't have enough of them. We need to focus on knowledge sharing. And interestingly, focusing internally as well between grassroots and elite level, not just looking to Europe constantly for the example. And a lot of talk about pitches as well. And I think this is something, we go down to that granular detail about infrastructure and saying how, well, maybe the men have the prioritization of the services over the women. There was Fran's point of view, and we have to negotiate with the men's team for playing fields. There needs to be greater investment into building more resources like playing fields so that Banyana don't have to wait. So all sorts of things covered there. Lots of value offered by that panel. So thank you to them for their insights and their contributions.